Aman Singh arrived in Canada full of hope and ambition, dreaming of a better life far from home. But the pressures of survival, isolation, and the desire for a shortcut led him down a dangerous path. What began as a calculated marriage scam soon turned into obsession and revenge, fueled by a devastating diagnosis that shattered his mind. In the end, Aman's pursuit of opportunity became a story of betrayal, violence, and murder that shocked both India and Canada. The young man grew up in a small town in India where opportunities were limited and expectations were heavy. From an early age, he was told that studying abroad was the fastest way to success and respect. His family believed Canada was a land of fairness, good jobs, and permanent security. They invested everything into his dream. Farmland was sold, jewelry was pawned, and loans were taken from relatives to pay tuition and visa fees. When his student visa was approved, it felt like victory before the battle had even begun. After arriving in Canada, the excitement faded quickly. The city was colder than he imagined, both in weather and in human connection. His part-time job barely covered rent for a shared basement room. Long shifts left him exhausted, yet his grades suffered because survival came first. He watched other international students struggle the same way, quietly competing for shifts, housing, and legal work hours. The pressure to succeed became overwhelming because failure meant returning home in shame and debt. Phone calls from family made things worse. They spoke proudly to neighbors about his future while asking when he would send money back. He lied to them, hiding his reality behind confident words. Immigration rules confused him, and pathways to permanent residency seemed designed to reject people like him. Each rejection story he heard increased his fear of being sent back after his studies ended. Slowly, his mindset changed. Hard work no longer felt enough. He began searching for faster ways to secure his future. Online forums, whispered advice from classmates, and late-night conversations introduced him to illegal shortcuts. At first, he rejected them, but desperation slowly overpowered his morals. The dream that once motivated him now trapped him. Without realizing it, his journey toward success had already placed him on a path where one wrong decision would lead to consequences far beyond anything he could imagine. As his fear of deportation grew, he became more attentive to stories circulating among international students. Many spoke quietly about marriages that existed only on paper, arrangements made to satisfy immigration requirements rather than build a life together. These stories were shared cautiously, often framed as survival tactics rather than crimes. At first, he listened without interest, but the idea stayed in his mind. The possibility of securing permanent status through marriage began to feel like a solution to every problem he faced. He started researching the process obsessively. Immigration rules, sponsorship timelines, and legal loopholes filled his nights. Online groups offered guidance, while private agents promised guaranteed results for a fee. Through these channels, he learned how carefully planned fake marriages avoided early suspicion. Photographs, shared addresses, and limited public appearances were enough to convince authorities. The system appeared strict on paper, but vulnerable in practice. Eventually, he was introduced to a woman from India who already held permanent residency. She was financially stable, but emotionally vulnerable, hoping marriage would offer companionship and security. He presented himself as sincere, ambitious, and committed to building a future together. The marriage was registered quickly, supported by documents that created the illusion of a genuine relationship. Family members overseas celebrated, unaware that everything was built on deception. Once the paperwork was submitted, his behavior changed. He avoided emotional responsibility and limited contact. His focus shifted entirely to immigration approval. When his status was finally secured, relief washed over him, followed by emotional detachment. He moved away without explanation, cutting all ties. The woman was left to face unanswered questions, legal uncertainty, and emotional damage. After gaining legal stability, he believed his worst struggles were behind him. With permanent status secured, he focused on work and rebuilding his finances. He moved frequently, kept his circle small, and avoided emotional attachments. Life felt controlled again, even if empty. Routine replaced anxiety, and for a brief period, he felt untouchable, as though the risks he took had paid off without consequence. That illusion ended during a routine medical visit required for employment benefits. He expected nothing unusual, but the test results changed everything. The diagnosis confirmed he was HIV positive. Shock quickly turned into disbelief, then panic. His thoughts spiraled as fear of social rejection and lifelong treatment set in. Instead of seeking proper counseling or emotional support, he isolated himself further, consumed by anger and shame. He began replaying past relationships in his mind, searching for a cause. Rather than accepting responsibility or the randomness of illness, he focused on blame. His mind narrowed until one person dominated his thoughts. The woman from the marriage scam became a symbol of betrayal in his distorted thinking. He convinced himself that she had somehow ruined his life, even though logic offered no support for that belief. As weeks passed, his mental health deteriorated. He avoided medical follow-ups and ignored treatment options. Online searches replaced professional advice, feeding paranoia and misinformation. Every negative story he read deepened his sense of injustice. He stopped sleeping properly and grew emotionally unstable. Friends noticed changes but remained unaware of the cause. The diagnosis became the turning point that stripped away any remaining empathy. Fear transformed into resentment, and resentment hardened into obsession. The success he once celebrated now felt meaningless. In his mind, the future no longer mattered unless someone else suffered as he did. His thoughts slowly shifted from confusion to fixation. The more he isolated himself, the more his mind returned to the same memory, replaying the marriage scam again and again. What once felt like a clever escape now felt unfinished. He convinced himself that the past had followed him into the present, poisoning his life. Instead of seeing his illness as a medical condition, he treated it like a personal attack that demanded balance through suffering. He began spending long hours online, scrolling through social media and archived messages. Without directly contacting her, he monitored her life from a distance. Small details became important to him. Her work schedule, her neighborhood, and even casual photos fueled his growing obsession. Each detail strengthened his belief that she had moved on easily while he felt trapped in fear and anger. This imbalance fed his desire for revenge. His routine changed. He stopped caring about work performance and personal health. Planning replaced productivity. Maps, transit routes, and weather patterns became part of his daily focus. He justified these thoughts by telling himself he was reclaiming control over his life. The idea of confronting consequences disappeared from his mind. Only the need to act remained. At the same time, his emotional detachment deepened. He no longer felt guilt or hesitation. News stories about violence no longer disturbed him. Instead, they felt distant and unreal. He believed his situation was unique and beyond moral judgment. This dangerous mindset allowed violent ideas to feel logical rather than extreme. As days turned into weeks, the obsession became his only sense of purpose. Everything else faded into background noise. Friends drifted away, unanswered messages piled up, and responsibilities were ignored. His identity narrowed into a single mission driven by resentment and distorted logic. By the time he finally decided to act, the night he chose was quiet and unforgiving, the kind of night where the streets felt empty and sound carried too far. Cold air filled the city, and lights glowed dimly from apartment windows as people settled into ordinary routines, unaware that something irreversible was about to happen. He moved through the city with a calm that felt unnatural, driven by weeks of obsessive planning and emotional numbness. Fear no longer stopped him. It had transformed into a strange sense of certainty. As he reached the residential area, everything felt slowed, almost distant. The building looked ordinary, blending into countless others like it. Nothing about it suggested the violence that would soon occur inside. He waited, watching patterns he already knew by heart. His mind was silent, no longer questioning consequences or morality. The moment felt inevitable, as if events had been set in motion long before this night. When the attack happened, it was sudden and fueled by rage that had been building for months. The violence was personal, uncontrolled, and brutal. Objects were overturned, and signs of struggle marked the space. The intensity of his actions reflected years of suppressed fear, anger, and self-loathing. In those moments, he was no longer thinking about the future, the law, or even himself. Everything narrowed to release. After it was over, reality returned too quickly. The silence that followed was heavy and unsettling. He left the scene shaken but not regretful, believing he had completed something necessary. Outside, the cold air felt sharper, and distant city sounds resumed as if nothing had happened. Nearby residents noticed unusual noises but dismissed them, assuming it was nothing more than a domestic disturbance. By the time authorities were alerted, it was too late. What began as an immigration scam had ended in irreversible loss. That single night turned hidden resentment. The investigation began with a scene that immediately suggested personal motive rather than random violence. The apartment showed signs of struggle, and the nature of the attack indicated familiarity between the victim and the offender. Investigators carefully documented every detail, knowing that small clues often revealed the larger truth. Neighbors provided timelines, describing unusual sounds and movements that helped narrow the window of the crime. Surveillance footage from nearby buildings became a critical lead. Cameras captured a figure entering and leaving the area during the estimated time of the attack. Transit records and mobile location data supported the footage, tracing a clear path across the city that night. Digital evidence soon played a central role. Online activity revealed weeks of obsessive research, location searches, and social media monitoring tied directly to the victim. As authorities examined immigration records, a disturbing pattern emerged. The previous marriage, initially appearing legitimate, raised red flags under closer review. Financial transactions, shared addresses, and sudden separation pointed toward a marriage arranged for legal benefit. This discovery shifted the investigation from a single act of violence to a broader story of fraud and betrayal. Medical records legally obtained through court orders revealed the suspect's recent diagnosis. While the illness did not explain the crime, it provided insight into his psychological decline. Investigators noted missed medical appointments and a clear pattern of isolation following the diagnosis. This context helped establish motive rooted in resentment and mental instability rather than immediate provocation. With evidence connecting digital behavior, immigration fraud, and physical movement, the case solidified quickly. Authorities issued an arrest alert, recognizing the suspect posed a continued risk without resistance. But the emotional collapse that followed was impossible to ignore. He appeared exhausted, detached, and visibly unstable, as though the weight of his actions had finally settled in. Authorities moved quickly, aware of the public attention growing around the case. News of the arrest spread rapidly, especially within immigrant communities who recognized elements of their own struggles in the unfolding story. During the early stages of custody, investigators pieced together his past decisions in precise order. Financial records showed the sudden improvement in his status after the marriage. Communication logs confirmed deliberate distancing once legal approval was secured. His online history revealed a steady descent into obsession, marked by repeated searches tied to the victim's movements and personal life. Each discovery reinforced the conclusion that the crime was premeditated rather than spontaneous. As details emerged, the narrative shifted from a single violent act to a broader cautionary tale. Media outlets highlighted the dangers of marriage fraud, untreated mental health issues, and misinformation surrounding serious medical diagnoses. The case exposed how desperation, when mixed with deception, could spiral into tragedy. Immigration authorities reopened related files, launching reviews of similar cases across the region. Public reaction was divided between shock and anger. Advocacy groups emphasized the need for mental health support for international students, while others focused on the severe consequences of abusing immigration systems. The victim's identity became a symbol of silent suffering caused by exploitation and abandonment. For him, the reality of incarceration replaced the illusion of control. The future he once tried to secure through shortcuts now vanished completely. With every document reviewed and every charge filed, his attempt to escape hardship had fully unraveled. The trial concluded with a sentence that ensured he would never regain the life he once imagined. Evidence presented during proceedings painted a clear picture of calculated deception, emotional collapse, and deliberate violence. The court rejected any attempt to excuse his actions through circumstance or illness. Responsibility remained fixed on the choices he made long before the crime occurred. With a verdict delivered, the legal process reached its end, but the consequences extended far beyond the courtroom. For the victim's family, justice offered no real closure. Their loss was permanent, shaped by betrayal that began with trust and ended in violence. The case forced them to relive painful details as the truth emerged publicly. What had once been a private family tragedy became a national discussion, reopening wounds with every headline and documentary retelling. Within immigrant communities, the story became a cautionary example. It exposed the dangers of illegal shortcuts and the emotional toll of untreated mental health struggles. Advocacy groups highlighted the need for better support systems for international students, especially those facing isolation and fear. Authorities strengthened monitoring of marriage-based applications, using the case as evidence of systemic vulnerability. In prison, time stripped away all illusions. Days became routine, marked by confinement and reflection rather than ambition. The status he once valued lost all meaning. What remained was a lifetime shaped by irreversible decisions. Regret, whether acknowledged or not, could no longer change outcomes. This story stands as a warning about how desperation, when combined with deception and untreated trauma, can destroy multiple lives. One act of fraud led to obsession, violence, and permanent loss. What began as a dream of opportunity ended as a record of tragedy, reminding viewers that shortcuts built on lies rarely end quietly and always demand a devastating price.